Says clinical observations show very few smokers are hospitalized for the COVID-19 virus. Cigarette smoking is known to be the cause of certain respiratory conditions like cancers and other diseases. Today, as we mentioned, is World No Tobacco Day, and campaigners are calling on the youth to be protected from the product. To talk about this and his peer-reviewed study, cardiologist and anti-smoking researcher and public health expert, senior researcher at the University of Patras and the School of Public Health in Greece, Professor joins us. Professor Farsalinos, let's talk about what this means. As I said, you're an anti-smoking campaigner, but then talking about your reviewed studies, it does sound strange to suggest that tobacco products may be helpful in dealing with COVID-19.
Yes, I would say that we were witnessing a paradox, which we try to analyze, and we have already analyzed more than 30 publications, case series of COVID-19 patients. But I need to clarify that there is no debate about using smoking as a protective measure. There is no way that smoking can be a protective measure. It's unpractical. It's impossible to even imply that, because, as you very well mentioned, there are substantial long-term health harms. So we are focusing on one of the components of tobacco cigarette smoke, which is nicotine. So we are seeing that there is some data to suggest that nicotine may have protective effects against COVID-19.
And you're saying that it could be competitive for the NACHRs that could restore the compromised function. So how would you repurpose nicotine for this effect? And just perhaps take us through how it works. If we're talking about respiratory problems, how does COVID-19 deal with, what are the characteristics of it, especially with people smoking, and how would nicotine then be repurposed?
Yes, we know that severe COVID-19 is mainly a problem coming from what we call a hyper-inflammatory response. We call this cytokine storm. So the immune system of the human body reacts, but at some point overreacts and cannot return to homeostasis, cannot balance this reaction. So in reality, it's our own immune response that is uncontrolled and that causes all the damage to the tissue. And it's not, the virus itself which causes the harm when we're talking about severe COVID-19. So we know that the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, there is a system in the human body called cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway. And this is a pathway that controls and moderates this hyperimmune response. And nicotine is an agonist. And that's why we think that it's not, of course, smoking, and we cannot suggest anyone to start smoking or to continue to smoke. It is imperative for everyone to quit smoking as early as possible. But we think that nicotine may play a role, and we are finding from molecular models that there is an interaction between the virus and these receptors which nicotine can protect. That's why we think it is urgent to perform a clinical trial and assess the effects of nicotine among COVID-19 patients.
You and your peers used China as an example, because obviously China was the first country to report COVID-19 in its current form, and it has a high population of smokers. But you say a very negligible number of those were hospitalized as a result of COVID-19. What were the findings, and what further findings were you making in your study on why there was a smaller number than expected, if the disease burden was expected to be higher if you are a smoker, for instance?
Yes, exactly. What we were expecting is for smokers to be overrepresented among COVID-19 patients, but what we witnessed was an underrepresentation by about 1/3 to 1/4 compared to the population smoking rates. And this has also been observed not only in China, but also from case series from the US, from the UK, and from other countries. So it seems to be a noteworthy observation and something that we may call a paradox, but it made us think of mechanisms that could be implicated. As I said, and I want your viewers to fully understand that smoking cannot act as a protective measure against anything. But we think that nicotine can have a role, and this should be urgently studied in clinical trials.
Talk about the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway, and also talk about nicotine as a defense system. If you could literally draw a picture for us, how that would work, and if there's any danger of abuse from these various products, which are already, I believe, over-the-counter available, that could be used.
Yes, and thank you for that. We are always talking about pharmaceutical nicotine products. Pharmaceutical nicotine products have been available for years. They have been used not only as smoking substitutes, but they have been administered therapeutically in elderly non-smoking patients, for example, for Parkinson's disease and for Alzheimer's disease, because there are some therapeutic effects of pharmaceutical nicotine products. And they have been shown to be relatively safe, no major side effects or complications, and they don't cause dependence. So these pharmaceutical nicotine products, mainly in the form of patches, do not cause dependence even after months of use in elderly people at high doses who were never smokers. In the case of COVID, we are talking about clinical trials that will need not more than 2 weeks of treatment. So you understand that it's a short period of time. It's about an acute infection. It's not about a disease and any other type of disease, which is a long-term disease. So you would just need to administer it short-term. So I think it's perfectly justifiable based on the observations and the potential mechanisms behind the nicotine effects. It's perfectly justifiable to perform a clinical trial. We need to clarify that unless there is a clinical trial and we see the results, people should not go and buy pharmaceutical nicotine products and use them for self-medication.
What have been the limitations of the studies you've carried out?
There are several limitations which you understand are due to the emergency, the urgency of the pandemic, and that is the possibility for under-reporting of the smoking status or inaccurate reporting of the smoking status. But since there is a vast difference, you need to understand that we need to talk about vast over-reporting in order to justify such low numbers. So we also think through our molecular docking computational models that there is some scientific basis in terms of a direct interaction between the virus and the nicotinic receptors behind this observation. So we have a combination of a clinical observation, which of course has limitations, and some computational models which find that the three-dimensional structure of the virus and the receptors can interact. And this is why we think that this matter, it's not a matter of smoking, it's a matter of pharmaceutical nicotine, needs to be examined through clinical trials.
All right, thank you so much for speaking to us, Professor Konstantinos Farsalinos. He is a cardiologist and he's also a public health expert, a senior researcher at the University of Greece. And he says very emphatically that this is not an encouragement to initiate smoking, and that if you are a smoker that you need to quit. But what we're talking about here are the properties of nicotine, but saying that that still has to be subjected to various trials and approvals. So we'll be talking about World No Tobacco Day in just a moment, and have a debate, as you saw earlier on, about whether or not the youth are being manipulated by tobacco companies. So a reminder now of